You will forgive me. First of all, let me introduce myself. My name is Martin Dr. Hughes. I'm delighted to have been re-elected after an emergency AGM prior to the general election. Let's not talk about that. That's 3 in 5 years. So I took on the position of chair at an emergency AGM prior to the general election because Damien, sadly, our congratulations to him, had been sent upwards to become a parliamentary private secretary to a minister. So he now has a position within the government, and which means technically in some strange way he can't be the chair. And I was of course his co-chair, so I was delighted at an emergency meeting prior to the election to be to fill in his shoes. And members of the Commons and the House of Lords were very kind enough to return me as a chair of the group, which I'm absolutely delighted to do, and to thank Brigitte and Fernando and all the team at the Big Innovation Centre for all the work that they've done. The last 18 months have been a bit of a roller coaster in the politics of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. I don't think it's over yet, but the APPG has been one of the most well attended of all of the all-party parliamentary groups that I've been to. And I must say the attendance tonight, especially in the evening, in a cold night like this, it's really good to see. So first of all, thank you all so much for coming. Tonight's evidence session is about agriculture and food and manufacturing. We have a range of people giving evidence tonight, and I'll maybe just introduce them to Genevieve, CEO of AgriLedger. Very welcome joining us this evening. Lucas, forgive me, my glasses aren't right. Is Lucas there? Yes, Lucas is here from Trasable. Michael is a partner on Future Farm. Is Michael here? Yeah. These pictures on my glasses, I need new ones, I think. Raghavendra is here as well. It's nice to see you, from General Manager of Robert Bosch. Christine is here as well. Thank you very much, from Accenture, and also Neil Ashworth from SAP. Thank you for joining us this evening as well, Neil. Julia is Director of Openness and Data and Digital at the Food Standards Agency. We're delighted to see you. Thank you for coming. And Jeffrey is a Senior Researcher at the Associate at UCL. You can find out all their surnames later when you talk to them. That's the way to make sure you talk to them after the evidence session itself. So first of all, thank you all very much for coming. There's a range of issues we might want to talk about, and I think we'll just basically go straight into the evidence session. And Brigitte and Fernando also have me down at a very strict timetable, and I'm sure that there'll be a timer on somewhere. And so introductions have been done. Brigitte, would you like to say a few words first of all at the first APPG of this new Parliament, which hopefully will sit for 5 years?
Yes, exactly.
So let's see how we go on with that one.
I just want to welcome everybody here to the very first meeting, and you'll all have seen on the agenda we have lots of meetings coming up over the next 2 years. So we have meetings, evidence meetings. We create a little bit of a variety of evidence meetings here. We will have showcases. We will have breakfast meetings where we are launching our work on government, and then we will have receptions. And when we had the advisory board meeting before you came in, we discussed that one of the major aspects we want to do here is also to impact the regulation and policy. We are here to provide evidence and information, not only for those giving evidence, but everyone attending. So we were discussing we need to maybe influence, or at least tell what we are finding in relationship to the government's call on for consultation on corporate governance. In the spring, the question is not out yet, but I'm sure it's related to blockchain. Data governance is a clearly very important issue. FinTech is a big issue. But also, most of all, what we did 2 years ago, we mapped the whole UK's blockchain ecosystem, because we believe that we are all part of the blockchain ecosystem. And we were mapping the blockchain companies, investors, tech hubs, and talent, and elite entrepreneurs. And many of you were part of that 2 years ago, but we'll be doing exactly the same and seeing how we've been growing in blockchain, but also changing in the demographic. So we have a very busy year coming up, but we will be circulated, distributing the agenda, not the agenda, the program, if you haven't already. And I don't want to spend more time, there's so much to go through, but we're going to go through a very exciting time, and we want to work on real impact, real evidence making a difference.
Thank you very much. I think what we'll do is we'll fire straight into the evidence sections, and I'm going to call on Genevieve first of all, who's the founder and CEO of AgriLedger, and if you'd maybe like to address the body of the Kirk, as we say where I come from, and we'll take it from there.
Thank you. I'd like to say thank you very much for having me, and very happy we finally got there from September.
Yes.
And I think that
you and I both.
Yeah, very interesting that actually from the husband just got a note as to what is happening with the trade, and it was an announcement made by the government that the smart trade borders will not be available until 2025. And
Sorry, can you say that again?
The smart trade borders. So Mr. Grove says that the smart trade borders will not be available until 2025, and that means that we are going to see a lot of the frictionless trade and objective will not be happening until the end of 2021 at best. There is also the HMRC suggests that the number of custom declaration will rise from 55 million at present to about 200 million after Brexit. And part of that is really because there isn't the technology that is necessary. And from what I understand, there is about 10 million available, and I believe that the blockchain technology would be well fitting in there. So let me introduce you to AgriLedger. AgriLedger is a platform that brings much needed transparency along the agricultural value chain and builds trust among all stakeholders. The platform enables full traceability of products from end-to-end tracking and all related financial obligation, and facilitates immediate distribution of payments to participating actors. The global food system is expected to provide safe and nutritious food to the population that will grow from 7.5 million today to nearly 10 billion by 2050. Ending hunger, achieving food security, and improved nutrition while promoting sustainable agriculture is a number 2 United Nations sustainable goal. Feeding a growing population, providing livelihood for farmers, and protecting the environment are some of the greatest challenges facing the world today, and these 3 issues must be tackled together if we are to make sustainable progress in any of them. I, at AgriLedger, look mostly at the developing world, but I do believe that this is something which is also applicable to the developed world. So if we look at Africa, many farmers are unbankable and did not have access to conventional banking system, which makes it difficult for them to borrow and secure funding in the time for planting season. As a result, over 50% of the harvest value is lost between harvest and selling point. Driven by the desire to create transparency, reduce operational costs, and improve global food safety, the next generation of software architecture is cropping in provenance and payment system for daily fare like mangoes in Haiti, organic oats in Australia, free-range beef in the United States, and chicken in China. Strengthening the skill and capacity of local farmers to achieve food security and market inclusion through sustainable goals, global knowledge transfer, and technical assistance foster a community of support and shared prosperity. Blockchain technology improves informational transparency and accuracy, thus increasing trust between parties, reduce costs, and boost efficiency. Thanks to this benefit, blockchain technology could be the key to transforming agricultural commerce. The market demand for such solution in the global food supply chain is expected to grow over 360 billion by 2026 and surge to more than 3.1 trillion by 2030. That's according to Gartner. And so I would like to talk about also a bit more about the resolving the critical agricultural supply chain, which is the power of technology. We have developed the AgriLedger solution to address this issue and change the narrative. And we are looking at Africa because it is really becoming again the breadbasket of the world. This is a technical inclusion that aims to positively disrupt the African agricultural ecosystem. We secure and modular blockchain enterprise solution that is designed to address the key supply chain issue of weak infrastructure and logistics. documentation costs, lack of transparency, and ability to trace product as they move through the value chain. What are the key components? That's fully traceable, instant payment, digital identity, integration with IoT, project journey, and smart contract enable. The implementation of the solution achieves seamless integration to the value chain and process across multiple systems that are controlled by several players. Transparency and traceability of product and services for the purpose of food safety, rules of origin, consumer information, and building trust in the network. Mobile payment for unbanked farmers. The statistics are there are 1.7 billion unbanked, with 3/4 of them having phones. Why are they not part of the financial? So the system keeps track of all the invoicing along the value chain until the final user, facilitating faster payment via smart contract. Better access to market, domestic as well as global, for farmers in Africa by providing them the right platform with the right players, optimize and improve margins by giving them fair pricing and desired financial inclusion, trusted and secure process from production to consumption, addressing food safety issues throughout the value chain, increase operational efficiency as a decentralized ledger, single source of truth is accessible by all players, and provides seamless communication regarding what needs to be done, whether that means harvesting, making storage related adjustment, ordering new equipment, and scalability as the tool deployed across commodities include corn, wheat, vegetable, cocoa, cashew, and cotton. We bring significant saving in commercial grain to agriculture, but also one step further by setting farmer empowerment at the heart of the effort toward global food security, ensuring that it focuses on providing livelihood for the farmers. With the correct inputs, fertilizer and seed, being made available to smallholder farmer in a sustainable manner, there are significant efficiency that can be gained in the production of crop. When applying the same effort to same acreage, the farmer can achieve 4 to 5 times bigger yield by using accurate data for monitoring throughout the crop's life cycle is a game changer. A 4-fold increase in production can take a subsistence farmer to the realm of reaping not only enough food, but in addition sell the excess to cater to his other needs. Providing a reliable, secure, and end-to-end track and trace from production to consumption, collecting data along the supply chain would deliver intelligence and solution on how to address the challenge highlighted, ensuring the consistency and the quality of data across all commodity. So we are doing a pilot project at this time in Haiti with the mango, where we are allowing the farmers to retain ownership. We have also applied for a DFID looking to do in Zimbabwe with corn and wheat. And we are working with a consortium that includes OCP and Lima Grain as major retailers and manufacturers, which will support the optimization of the value chain. We will think, okay, what does it do to us? Actually, that corn is used to create syrup that comes into our products. If there is not enough of it, the price goes up, and it affects our trades also. And knowing that it has been done in the right way is very important.
I'm just conscious of time.
Yep, so that's I think that this is where we have looked at it as a strategy, mostly for the developing market. In my point of view, it is really something that is needed for developed markets also. Very much so in the same way we used to not think we needed a cell phone. We were very happy to take our calls from home because that seemed efficient. But once the cell phone took over and it was mostly leapfrog in Africa, we realized the need. And I think that today, in what is happening with our borders, there is an opportunity to really look at those this technology to support those needs.
Very much indeed, and we will take questions at the end of the evidence, between the evidence sessions. And I think you said something about track and trace, and given the fact that we're about to have a land border on the Isle of Ireland, which will be our border with the European Union, and across agriculture, there's certainly issues which are for the rest of the world to be learning from the whole continent of Africa and the work that you're doing. So thank you very much indeed. Lucas Salinas is CTO Traceable. So Lucas, go for it.
Okay, first of all, thank you for having me. and let me say what we do. We started our project at the end of 2017, aiming to unify the traceability information for each stakeholder that interacts in a supply chain. Our main goal was to change the way it communicates from a snowball data workflow, where each stakeholder depends on the previous one, to the centralized data workflow, where each stakeholder has direct access to the current batch information anywhere in the supply chain. We found blockchain technology very interesting to solve issues like opacity and data retrieving delay, originated in the snowball data systems. The main benefit it has is fast and efficient access to reliable traceability data. Every stakeholder can trust the source information because of its immutability once it is recorded. But notice that blockchain technology is not meant to verify the information is being recorded. IoT technology that can help ensure the data is being introduced in blockchain, depending on the kind of industry it is applied in. IoT technology can have many advantages, like triggering actions inside blockchain, such as delivery, or even tracking in different stages of a process. Blockchain transactions can be publicly accessed, but it does not ensure fair payments, due to the supply chain systems in blockchain varying from each other on how they are developed. In a few words, it can be used to ensure fair payments depending on the will of the industry. Blockchain can reward producers in terms of confidence due to the transparency in the raw materials' origins and procedures. The more transparency the raw materials' origin, the more rewarded sustainable farming practices will be. It wouldn't be difficult to build a fast and efficient system to store the traceability data, but it wouldn't be readable. That's what blockchain aims to fix. The immutability of the records, the truth about who was the owner of a specific batch in a given period of time, what processes it had, who was the next owner, or even government sanitary controls at the specific states. In the end, a complete end-to-end supply chain solution. Our system gives an identity to each stakeholder in the supply chain. Then the stakeholder is able to create, transfer, and transform a digital identity associated with a physical good. Once we can perform those actions to that digital identity, this is where we can say the item has been tracked. Then a tracked item can be traced back. Due to the immutability it offers us, this is how we can maintain the original game rules under which companies and products are going to behave. Having the information in a unique and immutable digital ledger, traceability data can be accessed in seconds instead of days. And the key metrics in recall processes are speed and reliability, and both of them are improved exponentially with blockchain technology's adoption. Thank you very much.
I think one of the things you talked about is traceability data and the impact, I would say, on quality.
Yeah.
And again, it comes back to the UK's future relationships with others, the traceability element of data, and also the quality of the product. In this term, the agricultural product will be very important. So thank you very much for that. Michael, next on to you.
Yes, so thank you for inviting me. I'm honored to be here. And I'm here today representing a research project called Future Farm, which is a project sponsored by the Norwegian Research Council. And in addition to In Future consists of 5 large stakeholders within Norwegian agriculture, namely Tine, Felleskjøpet Agri, Yara, Eurofins, and NMBU University. And the aim for our research project is to explore how we can use emerging technologies to improve grass production, both within the terms of quality and efficiency. And you can ask yourself why this is important. Well, of course, the world needs more food to solve the needs for a growing population, and at the same time we need to reduce our climate footprint. And emissions from cattle today constitute a significant portion of greenhouse gas emissions. And research has shown that better quality on the grass used as feed can alone reduce the climate emissions from cattle by up to 30%, in addition to improving animal health and welfare. So, moreover, it's been identified that in Norwegian grass production alone, the Norwegian farmers lose over 20 million pounds annually due to deviation from best practices when it comes to grass production. And the lack of a national overview and digital footprint in grass production creates a national vulnerability in situations such as the drought crisis that we had in Northern Europe in 2018. So in Norway, we have around 8,000 dairy farmers spread across the whole country. And the average farmer is a small business interacting both with each other and with stakeholders such as the ones in our consortium. And the farmers in Norway have access to a plethora of digital tools. But due to the large variety of tasks, these digital tools do not, they need to use multiple of them, and they don't talk to each other. Meaning that the farmer has data spread across multiple systems. And when you take a user-centric approach, it becomes quite clear that in order for us to reach our targets, it's not only about releasing more sensors or releasing more software, but it's also about integrating the solutions provided by various companies across the whole value chain of the farmer. So creating a blockchain infrastructure for a shared truth and higher transparency enables a lot of use cases that we believe will reach our targets, such as simply connecting the data from fieldwork with cattle data would allow the farmer to optimize his grass production based on his milk targets rather than sub-optimize each step in the process. A better blockchain infrastructure can also help in improve farmer trading between each other and also allow farmers to benchmark their practices with each other while maintaining their need for privacy. And in addition to this, lastly, of course, there's all these cases with certifications and food safety and all these other things as well, of course. So in the research project we're developing multiple use cases and we're piloting several concepts that explore these opportunities. And we have an early demo of sharing data through the IOTA technology available for the public online, where we create digital twins of the round bales, which are the cylindrical bales of compact grass or straw that you use as feed. And this allows relevant stakeholders to collaborate much closer than ever before. In the demo, important information such as ownership data, input, and nutriental content is shared in the digital twin. And this is our first attempt to build an ecosystem, enabling different type of vendors to provide services based on the same data set. So utilizing blockchain seems to be completely vital to enable these types of use cases, where multiple stakeholders each hold their piece of the puzzle. More traditional setups create too much complexity or inequality between the stakeholders to seem viable in situations like this. So I would like to summarize by saying that I believe that these concepts are of public importance to of public interest to develop, but can't be done by individual companies. At the same time, this type of cross-company innovation is very difficult and new for a lot of companies. And I do believe that the government has an important role to play in supporting these type of initiatives, mainly within 3 areas. One is education, since blockchain competency is scarce and we constantly rely on international expertise. One is in encouraging and supporting these type of projects, because the support that we got from the Norwegian Research Council has been vital for us to get going here. And lastly, also considering taking an active role in applying blockchain within the areas governed by the state, because this allows for innovation while maintaining public interest, for instance in areas such as food safety. Thank you.
You're right on time. Thank you very much for bringing that first section, because I want to move on to Julie in just a wee.
Sorry.
Oh, sorry. Yes, of course. Let me bear with me 1 wee second as we keep throwing in other names that I keep forgetting. Yes, so Neil, good, because you don't have a name in front of you. So I was going to ask you to briefly come in as well, but just in terms of the Norwegian experience and the importance of research councils being involved, I think that kind of flags up in a huge area of interest across not just the UK, but for any state who wants to take the viability of blockchain, the research councils, a range of areas need to be involved in technology. So Neil, thank you if you would like to address.
Thank you. So I represent SAP. So we cover a number of industries and have blockchain projects in a number of industries, but I'm going to talk about agriculture to start off with. Some of them might go into manufacturing later on, if that's okay. But the first one, we're running a live pilot at the moment in the United States with Bumblebee Foods. They are in the fisheries industry. So they are tracking and tracing live tuna that's caught in Indonesia by small fisheries with ethical farming mechanisms, and tracking that back to the market in the States. So this is something that's good for small businesses. It's also got an ethical side to it. And what Bumblebee Foods found was, in fact, in the States, they've been trying for a long time to get into major retail stores. But as soon as they saw these credentials coming through with the ethically sourced, not drift nets or anything, then they started being sold in some of the major supermarkets in the United States. So that's something you can see on YouTube. You can look at that experience there. So I think that's one great example of using blockchain in that area. It's for the same sort of transparency reasons we've heard before. It's tracking and tracing produce. It's allowing that certification to be recognised, and it's just giving transparency to that whole network. And it's the other side to it, hasn't been built on yet, but the consumer in the future could also then check what they're consuming, so you get that validation from the consumer side as well. So that's the next step. But that is now a standard offering, so from the UK point of view, we can actively look at other fisheries, but not just fisheries. It could be applied to any food producer, and it can be just not one item, it could be multiples. You could have ingredients of up to, let's say, 20 ingredients, and tracking all of those ingredients back, so that if you found a problem in one of them, like if it's a food product, you've got listeria, let's say, in chicken, and you want to trace that back, you can trace it back specifically to the actual farm that produced it, and thereby reduce a lot of waste. There's an awful lot of wastage in the food market, as we all know. So that's one area. Another area which am I allowed to talk about the manufacturing now?
Go for it.
Manufacturing
is next.
You're going to
So using kind of similar kind of principles, we went live with Coca-Cola again in the States last year. And that's very much from a point of view of a focal player, kind of a founder, kind of being a catalyst for the blockchain. And we've seen that being one of the key kind of ways to get a blockchain started, because I think we all know that one of the key barriers to blockchain is getting all the different parties on the same page as regarding business value and what they'll benefit from the blockchain. So Coca-Cola were a catalyst, and it's really all their bottling suppliers, and it's tracking and tracing their bottles and the suppliers to make sure they've got transparency over their network. And the last one I'll mention is in the UK. We're looking, it's actually in the construction industry, but it involves manufacturing, and it's linked to publicly funded works at HS2, and so we're looking to, we're doing a proof of concept at the moment, but bringing manufacturers into that network to try and create efficiencies in the construction industry, whereby we show transparency around a design and how that links to the manufactured products coming into the construction industry. And I think that the business values there depend on which lens you're viewing the blockchain from, whether you're the client side, manufacturer, or the contractor. So that's another area we're involved in.
Thank you very much indeed. Can I also just introduce Lord Waverley, who's a member from the House of Lords and one of our vice chairs who's been able to join us. It's nice to see you, sir.
Excellent.
That's quite all right. And then we're going to head on to Julie Pearce, who's Director of Openness, Data and Digital at the Food Standards Agency. And Julie, it's very nice to see you. I'm sure you've been in here before.
Well, you have.
Probably not in such nice circumstances. We'll see about select committees. And if you'd like to address the group, that'd be great.
Thank you very much. So yes, I'm from the Food Standards Agency, and just as a reminder, we are here for the consumer, to ensure the food we all eat is safe and what it says it is. And so therefore we're interested in the opportunities from blockchain both as an actor within the chain, what is the role of the regulator within all of these blockchains that have been described and just heard about, but also what might our role be as part of government in possibly establishing standards, maybe in pushing and driving for education. So we think we have a role to play in both of those. And we have some experience in that we have 2 pilots ourselves in different parts of the meat sector, one in cattle into slaughter becoming beef, and the other in regards to pork exports. So 2 different use cases, and we're also working with HMRC on wine imports. So we've got a number of relatively small scale but real live pilots. And so I think I can talk about what we've learned from our experience. And I think I'm going to just sort of bank lots of the opportunities that colleagues have articulated, agree with all of those, but also maybe add a reminder that getting on for half our food is imported, so therefore we don't just look at a narrow UK production world. We are very mindful of food being imported. We're also mindful of going forward. We've talked a little bit about border and about possible friction. The opportunity is to take away that friction, but also the opportunity would be to drive for increased not only speed in transaction, but that flexibility of being able to move and to trade differently. And some of our experience with blockchain would be that may be an enabler just to allow us to do that and to do it in a different way. Interested to hear a colleague mention the consumer. Absolutely, that's certainly why we are here. But the consumer doesn't just eat mangoes, or it doesn't just consume wheat from one supplier. They're eating pies, and they're eating burgers, and they're eating all of these wonderful things. So where we have now gone with our learning is to say, those blockchains, those one-dimensional blockchains were very interesting. They were quite easy to deploy. I've spent decades trying to deploy IT systems over the years, and the blockchain pilots were sometimes the fastest and the easiest to deploy. The but is that I think they were only easy because we had the data standards already agreed, and without the data standards we would have just been really slowed down and going into the mire. So my challenge is the importance of data standards and what is our role variously, and maybe pointing that at us as government and other industry bodies who establish standards. The importance of data standards, the importance of trust models, because that was the thing that sort of slowed down our pilots, was who owns it, who manages it, how do I trust the data that I'm sharing. So understanding trust was important. And then my final comment is will be, I suggest, an ecosystem of blockchains. So we've just about got our heads around a blockchain running through a supply chain, maybe touching on multiple organizations through that supply chain. And my challenge will be, yes, that's quite interesting. However, what happens when you try to get the blockchains to talk to each other? Because that's what food is. It's not a single monolithic provider or controller. Or certainly we are not keen for that sort of model to be created. So to keep it open would be my challenge.
Thank you very much, and you finished early, which is even better. Doesn't happen in parliamentary rooms very often. I thought one of the things you mentioned, you reminded us about half of the UK's food is imported, and of course when you're an island state, it's always going to be an issue. Of course we're not the only island state, and the issue of trust is essential in terms of the very fabric of the blockchain ecosystem itself. And finally, for the agricultural sector, Geoffrey Goodall is a senior researcher at UCL University College London, and I'm going to ask you to go in. So it's nice to see you.
Yes, thank you. Good to see you again. So first, I wanted to point out that in addition to working at UCL, I'm also the convener of two ISO working groups related to blockchain and distributed ledgers technology, including the Foundations Working Group, which is WG1, under the Blockchain and Distributed Ledger Technology Technical Committee. So a lot of the conversation that we're having here is certainly a topic of consideration for us as we consider use cases, as we consider the architecture of these systems, and as we consider their interoperability in particular, since that's come up a number of times. Now, I must say, when we refer to supply chain, what I was planning to discuss tonight really relates to the supply chain in the context of food and agriculture and perhaps manufacturing, but not consumer use. And I think when we consider this kind of tracking and tracing and the kind of infrastructure that we use for managing supply chains and monitoring supply chains, we must be very careful not to facilitate tracking and tracing of consumers in a way that might undermine their privacy. And I think that that's particularly important when we consider any kind of tracking and tracing that might be related to products that might be owned by a consumer and then used again or resold. And that might happen in the case of manufactured goods, probably less likely with agricultural ones, but not impossible. And these considerations, I think, are extremely important. So for context, in the context of these different markets, these agricultural goods, food products, manufactured goods, this includes payments, handoffs, transport, certifications. All of these kinds of functions can certainly be facilitated by distributed ledgers and the monitoring of distributed ledgers. And individual products themselves may be compound. Perhaps, for example, an agricultural product might combine agricultural products from different sources. And this might happen not only for food products that include different ingredients, but also for food products that might involve, for example, a pig who actually was fed a certain kind of grain. And the substitutes within these supply chains are also important. We must imagine that these markets would actually allow for competition in order for them to be useful, and we would need to have some kind of a network of users, which I'll get back to in a moment. And I'd like to point out that the context of DLT in agriculture and food products has been one of the most active areas of discussion going back a few years now with respect to DLT in the UK. And in particular, there are a number of groups such as BBFA and others who have led working groups to discuss this that have involved industry players as well as regulators. And in the context of manufacturing, I would say that this is actually similar in many ways to food. I mean, there are different details. For example, with manufactured goods, the complexity of manufactured goods, I imagine that an airplane might be a bit different in terms of the sourcing of its ingredients. And the product security questions that you can ask about something like a mobile phone are also quite relevant. But I think by and large, the questions are quite similar and parallel. So there are many benefits of using distributed ledger technology for these kinds of markets and these kinds of products. You can manage the production and supply. You can eliminate or reduce the whiptail effect. So if you've studied supply chains and operations research around supply chains, you might be familiar with the need to manage supply at different stages. DLT might help us get a universal view that can help us with this. It might also help us assess the sustainability of a supply chain and the various components within the supply chain. It might allow us to manage the contractual obligations of different parties in the supply chain. So think, for example, that smart contracts might manage or facilitate payments. It might even obviate the need for factoring companies, and so on. And finally, it might also allow us to make use of trustworthy information about the provenance of a product, the buyers at each stage, who has transported it. We can also imagine the well-functioning of marketplaces for products that might allow us to ask questions such as whether the bumblebee tuna, for example, actually does not have anything dodgy in the process of handoffs by and large throughout the production. And I would argue that there is, in all of these cases, value to standards for being able to describe what these different use cases are, what the different kinds of transactions are. And there are a number of efforts to do this that I think are particularly important, because we wouldn't be able to do this if it were not made into something that were globally or at minimum nationally respected as a particular way of doing this. Otherwise, it just becomes a platform. And we know what happens when we use platforms, which is that basically we have one party sitting in the center who's calling all of the shots. And I think that this is really where the government involvement needs to come in. So in terms of challenges, I would argue that, that really this is about multiple stakeholders, and I think Michael put it right. Multiple stakeholders need to be able to use this system without some kind of central gatekeeper, and also without creating some kind of n-squared problem where all of the different parties in the system need to establish bespoke relationships with all the other parties. That's really the problem that we're addressing. But it goes beyond this as well. We need to establish, for example, terms, and I would imagine that Incoterms or such as this a list of predefined commercial terms published by the International Chamber of Commerce might provide the foundation for how we think about this. And this provides rules for transport, allocation of costs, for example, to buyers and sellers, onboarding, customs, tariffs, etc. But we ultimately have to ask how we regulate such a network and how that regulation operates when we actually have cross-border transactions. Who's in charge? And these kinds of questions will need to be addressed specifically. And then finally, I think the hardest question, governance. So who controls this network anyway? I need not remind you about the experience of IBM and Maersk working together a few years ago. They built a really great technology, but ultimately a lot of the companies that prospectively may have chosen to work with them were concerned that this system might have been really just theirs, owned and operated by them, really controlled by them, so why would someone who might compete with them actually want to be involved? So the fact that we need to create this market infrastructure, I think, is the core question, and I think we need to look at co-regulatory solutions. In securities markets, we've done this with best execution, for example, so some of you who might have familiarity with the way that financial marketplaces for trading work, this, I think, is a useful example. And how do we actually preserve competition in this marketplace will ultimately be determined by whether regulators and regulatory touch points actually provide this neutral ground that prevents a particular market operator from operating the system. And I think that that's really the core question that I would ask to these different implementations of DLT is this really a platform that's provided by one company or one set of stakeholders in particular to the exclusion of others? Or is this really truly neutral? And it's hard for me to imagine it being really truly neutral without regulators being involved. So this question is I think, the core of what we need to consider when we want to understand whose system this is. And standards are part of this story, but ultimately I think we need a nudge as well.
Thank you very much, because I have so many questions I want to conduct, because I think of there's a rules-based system with a court of arbitration. But I don't think we want to go down that road right now, but I think you're certainly leading us in that type of direction, Jeffrey. And we have a few minutes of questions, and maybe if I can pose one to all of our speakers, and then maybe open it up to the floor. And if you're going to ask a question to the floor, can I ask you to be loud so I can hear you? And just say who you are, and if you're from an organization or a company, if you could just say the name of the company as well. Can blockchain capabilities improve sourcing information, produce treatability, and fair payments?
I'd like to actually take that question. So some of the, as to Jeffrey's question. In the Haiti project, we are involving the central bank and also the Chamber of Arbitration to be able to resolve issues and also conflict that may happen between the different parties. They have access to be able to see things and understand if there has been a force majeure. And in terms of the other reason for keeping the valuation of the product along the value chain, it will allow to do what is called fair wage. So really looking at SDG 1 and all the way to 5 by looking at what is a living income and a living wage, which therefore allows you to know what is the minimal price that should be charged for that item. And that then is presented back, has the ability to be presented back to the customer, who start understanding not only what the carbon footprint, if need be, but what is actually being paid to those who are producing. And obviously one of the questions that Julie pulled to us was this being able to get to an end product. I think that the technology is still new. In the next 3 to 5 years, we will see the amalgamation to be able to say, this cake has been made with all these different pieces. But that's not the challenge of actually tracing that. The greater challenge is getting everyone to accept, to use it. So that is why it's important that we start talking about this concept of Oracle, where we're getting information from people into the blockchain and creating these trusted environment to then get that detail.
Can I ask you mentioned a central bank. Do you mean a central state bank or a specific private bank? Or
No, central, working with two different banking institutions. The first one is working with the Central Bank of Haiti, which is looking from an AML standpoint and being able to see, really putting at what is their threshold and making sure that the right rates have been used. That's one, transparency. The other one is working with the trade import-export bank in Africa, which is looking to be able to mitigate the intra-Africa trade and also the external trade to then be able to adjust the exposure that they have to foreign currency.
It's very interesting. I'm now going to go to the floor if anyone else wants to ask a question.
I'm Christian de Watervan. I'm the CEO of Projectus Consultant Limited and the Global Ambassador for Public. Jeff, one question for you. It's very good as usual. You talked about privacy, which is one of your favorite topics, and dominance of protocols. How do you see, China has now blockchain as a national program, which is supervised by the President of China himself. How do you see are you worried about the dominance of the Chinese blockchain protocol in the supply chain? Does that worry you or not? Because I've heard some are very, very worried that China could take the lead in that area. What is your opinion about this?
Well, I think ultimately and thank you, Christian, for the question. So ultimately, I think that when we talk about protocols, if we want protocols to be adopted, ultimately they have to be neutral. And when I say neutral, what I mean is that that we need a multi-stakeholder process that is in place in order to establish how the protocol works, and then once the protocol is deployed, its use does not accrue to any particular party at the expense of others. So if there were a protocol that were developed by China that were not neutral, that favored them in some way or favored some particular technology or some particular way of being, then the question that I would ask is, why would it be used by anyone except them? Second, if there were a deployment of a technology that happened to involve China, like why would China need to be involved in running a system? Why would they be a central actor just because they happen to have built a protocol? And this is where I think we need to separate the question of protocols from networks, because a protocol is just a means of of speaking. A protocol could be a language, or it could be a form of a contract, or it could be many things, an encoding, syntax, but it's not the same as a network, which is an established set of organizations who actually operate something or interact with each other in some particular way. Now, if it were some kind of network that that China had built or that China had dominated, then the question to the rest of the world would be, why would you join that network if it were not neutral?
Jeffrey, what if you were you have a huge loan to the People's Republic of China, and you're engaged in a blockchain with them? The leverage that they might have on you to accept their protocols and their network might be quite substantial.
Absolutely.
Yes, in which case I think it's the network that is the issue, and not the protocol. So I think we need to separate these two things out. And the question then is, if the question is to join this other network, right? So we've moved beyond the question of the protocol, but the question is now to join the network. Then the answer would be why. Because if you're joining one particular distributed ledger or one particular any kind of business consortium, we necessarily have these questions of governance, and we have and also of dominance, and these kinds of questions I think would be as relevant for a distributed ledger arrangement as they would be for any kind of trade agreement, and I think we would need to think of it that way as well.
I'm going to bring Julian quickly, and then Genevieve as well. But Julian, when you go before
Yes,
another question.
I think I do not have the answer to the question, but I think what we would have to do would be to sort of unpack it. I don't think it's a binary either or, and there's certainly, again, from the Food Standards Agency operating at the food level. So what are the standards that would allow blockchain food to be moved across multiple blockchains? Now, there may be multiple sort of protocols, networks sitting beneath that, but we would be interested in something like food. And who else is? We speak to the Chinese about food. So again, I think it's understanding the different layers and not jumping to conclusions, either good or bad, one way or the other.
And I think before going to Genevieve, it's also the issue of if the United Kingdom's leaving the European Union, there are other trade partners who will be looking for changes in the agricultural standards.
Yeah.
Possibly. I could not make any assumptions, such as the United States. So it's not just China, but Genevieve.
No, I was going to say that we need to also be careful about being what we say about China. We should be looking at the fact that what they've been doing is what they call the Silk Road, the recreation of this trade Silk Road. So therefore, I am of the opinion that they will look to get the standards because they understand it's about the export of their goods. So if we take a reverse view where we don't want to pay, so to your question about the loan, we need to keep information separate from financial. And that is sometimes, obviously, the information will drive financial, and being able to assure that the information is correct and has the right data and has not been tampered is one of the things that you will get with the blockchain technology. So in order to be able to create its own wealth, China understands that concept of standard. And I'd say in the last 15 years, they have proven that in how they have restructured their language.
Any other questions before we're going to move on?
Chairman, if you may, and you mentioned Haiti, and that was interesting, but I wrote an article last night on the All Africa trade agreement, which is coming into being with all countries bar Eritrea. Do you think that what you have been discussing has...
Yes. So I have actually been talking with the African Export-Import Bank, AFRICSIM, and what they see is that there is a fundamental issue around trade imbalance within Africa. Mm-hmm. So if we look at cotton industry, the cotton need by Africa is 60% of the global need, while 3% only is being done into the global market. So how do they redirect that? And being able to have that intertrade is really one of the things that they're looking at.
With neighboring states and exports.
And neighbor state, and the view they have is that we may not be ready because part of the balance, so a couple of weeks ago there was the Westminster, they were all invited to 10, and unfortunately not that many of them showed up. About 17 head of states versus 43 having gone to Sochi. And the fundamental
They got
reason...
cancelled. They got cancelled. Sochi got cancelled.
Oh, Russia. So Russia just signed an agreement, a trade agreement with Africa. And the view was that we are not really looking at it in a new way. What they need is to be able to build the standards within Africa so that they're not just digging it up and sending it over. So it's almost also, if we can teach Africa how to supply its neighboring country, then the standards will go up to where they'll be acceptable for us.
Many more questions could emerge, but not now.
Yes. Just also. No, wait a minute. On you come. No, you weren't waiting, so that's fine. No, please, on you go. You weren't here.
So, yeah, if you don't mind, I wanted to briefly introduce myself. So, Srđan Koprešin, I'm the founder of Blockstruct, which is a Vienna, Austria-based blockchain platform and application development company. And I've started playing with blockchain in 2010, and over the past several years with my team have been developing blockchain for the real world solutions. There are several major issues which should be very carefully considered when adopting blockchain technology, regulating, and deciding what, if, and how to use. There's a major danger of either vendor or technology lock-in, or both. Somebody mentioned IBM Maersk case as a vendor lock-in one. Another one that I would like to bring your attention to is over-reliance on extremely complex technologies such as smart contracts. That would be technology lock-in. So to say, a normal person, not deeply technical person, has no way whatsoever to understand or be able to interact with a smart contract-based system. So what we are using instead is data transactions, and this will go very well with what you were addressing earlier. A data transaction is basically key value pair based interface where keys, for example, temperature value would be 22 or 24 or whatever degrees, or keys country of origin, and the value is Austria or Serbia or whatever else. With this concept we have developed actually, and it's not a POC, it's a running project, an agricultural commodity trading platform. So I'm not talking about derivatives, actual commodities with mass and volume and protein content and things like that. Also expiry dates. So this system is really a real-world application of blockchain where quality control or certification companies are involved. Banks, Crédit Agricole, Raiffeisen Bank, which is an Austrian regional bank operating in 16 countries, and OTP from Hungary, also a regional bank at the moment, and we are working to extend this. And that's another thing, so interaction between blockchain and the real world. Somebody also mentioned that earlier. We are actually achieving that by integrating our technology with existing systems rather than, so to say, disrupting and saying we don't need banks anymore, we don't need authorities, regulators, we can all live in a decentralized flower power reality. That's not really how the real world works. There are laws which do apply to business relationships regardless of where these relationships are created or unfold. So I don't know how much time I have.
Not very long, because I'm going to have to bring it, because we need to move on to the next section. Yeah.
So if you are ever interested in understanding a little bit more about what we are actually doing and with what stakeholders specifically for agriculture, I would be more than happy to elaborate.
I'm sure we can keep in touch. One final question before we move on.
As much as an observation, to keep it short, just something I wanted to pull out of the evidence. In effect, single source track and trace that is cross-border and benefiting everything from the supplier through to the consumer and giving information to the regulators through certification processes is already real. It's already in use. It's in use for things that are actually agricultural. One of the big proof points is, therefore, this is working for low commodity products. So without considering the economic value when you start applying it, as I'm sure we might get to in manufacturing, for high value products. So it's just there's a question in my mind is, okay, we're there already, we're one step away possibly from multi-component elements, something else we might hear again more in manufacturing. So it's on the policy side, isn't there a need to help the UK get up to speed in its use of this stuff? Because if you can deploy this stuff for a commodity right now across border, all the way from Indonesia to the US, actually it strikes me that there is an adoption issue that we should probably feed into other sessions.
I think the easy answer to that is yes, given the fact we're about to leave the European Union at the end of the year, and that we do have a land border with the world's largest liberal democratic free trade association on a range of multiple levels, and that land border on the Isle of Ireland, where there's a huge agricultural. Now that's what I find most important and interesting about this subject matter, is the impact of agriculture between the United Kingdom and the EU on the Isle of Ireland. I think we just do not realise the complexity of the production, the complexity of the elements that are involved, and I think there was something mentioned earlier on. I don't know who was mentioning Michael Gove in his speech, but in terms of the impact between 50 million HMRC engagements rising to 200 million, I think that's an underestimation. I hope not, but. We're going to move swiftly on to our manufacturing element. Raghavendra Kumkari is the General Manager of Bosch, and it's lovely to see you here. Thank you for joining us. And we're going to go straight on with you, sir.
Good evening, and I'm honored here, and thank you for having me and represent Bosch in this committee for talking about what we speak about blockchain. So a very quick 1-minute view of why Bosch is so keen about blockchain, because we play in the area of sensor software and services, and predominantly internet as a technology has really created a lot of platform monopolies, in the sense whether it is the platforms of the data or the platform of the businesses. So we believe that in future the machines or the things are going to play a huge role into it. So we put blockchain into two lenses. One is the lens of machines, where we think the machine economy is going to really be leveraged with a lot of autonomy when we really apply blockchain. And second, in the lens of business processes. When we talk about business processes, is about what you really heard about the agricultural topic, the pharma or the healthcare or manufacturing, where we can really have automation of shared business processes. So the participation of things with a ledger as a fabric for trust is going to be a game changer. And that's where we as Bosch believe that for us to move from automation to autonomy, or for us to move from Internet of Things, we need this blockchain to make them as economy of things. So Bosch really works on making things more economical, making things more prevalent, and being more accountable in the entire supply chain. So as Chris just mentioned, I just want to take some few examples which are really real, which can really accelerate the adoption, and with the help of regulators, it can really make blockchain a success. One of the topics that we have been working in Bosch is on the manufacturing, especially in the topic of foreign trade, where we try to solve the problem of provenance. So we have been working with one of the manufacturing giants in Turkey, where the problem that they have is they're part of the European customs, but they are not part of the European Union. So essentially what happens is that once the automotive or once a car or a vehicle has been manufactured, you essentially need to have a fabric of the entire provenance of where the parts come in. So it's not just the car, but you need to have the visibility of the tire 1, tire 2 and tire 3, and it becomes really complex. So if you apply blockchain as a topic, what you could do is you have a real-time reconciliation which can be used as an evidence for the regulatory bodies. Instead of spending 16 days to have the reconciliation, you can actually do it. But then if you look at how does it really enable a lot of flexibility, in the sense it gives you a lot of flexibility at your supply chain, your manufacturing of the lots. You can also get into a lot of things related to sustainability, fair trade, where you essentially have a complete governance which can be put onto this kind of a fabric. So what we did was, as Bosch, we started with the provenance of the supply chain to tier 2 and tier 3, with an ability to bring incentives, because if you go with the sustainability use cases, you don't have buyers there. So what is that low hanging, where you go to the table of the CFO and say, hey, what is that you can do? You can actually bring the tax related topic into it. Not that it is readily productive now, because again we have the barriers as what we discussed about the adoption. So this is one real example that we have been working on. The second one is especially in the manufacturing is about target recall, which is very much relevant for agriculture as well, in the sense where you want to recall either a food or the farmer in a targeted way. So we are working with one of the OEM who has roots from UK, is that, for warranty, when you have your early vehicle launches, where you need to have your infant mortality, in the sense when you launch your vehicle, you have a lot of problems that you foresee, whether it is for safety critical components. What you want to do is not to just go into the entire database and try to look at where is it happening. So you could rather have the provenance of those safety critical parts putting onto the ledger. If at all you find an evidence of a critical incidence from any part of the world, you could really go and trace it back to the point where the batch is being manufactured into it. So you could use it for your target recall, which actually gives you a huge benefit in terms of reduction of cost when it gets into the liabilities that would come into it. The third aspect where we look at the real use case that we are looking at is on the sustainability activities. In the sense, essentially you see the automotive industry or the manufacturing industry per se is getting into the sustainable part of it. Here we are talking about trying to trace few reusable components. It's not just the cobalt, which IBM and Volkswagen is definitely working onto it, but we are working on special materials like graphene. In the sense, these are materials which could be reused, because these materials, which are very special materials, can also create a lot of supply chain demand into the market, where essentially you have a lot of commercial impacts. So you have impact on the environment, sustainability, fair trade, child labor, and other things. So what we have is a digital identity which can actually prove the provenance of a particular part which contains these special elements, which can be really traced to the entire value chain. So essentially, if I look at today's topics, we are talking about traceability as the major topic, which is real, which is now and here. If in case there are regulators who can really enable this, I think we can take the leap onto it. But the second section which I'm going to talk about is more on the autonomy part of it, in the sense where you essentially create autonomous systems. Can we have autonomous shuttles into the factories? Can we have autonomous machines into the factories? Can we have autonomous vehicles? What we believe is that blockchain as a technology would definitely enable automation to autonomy. There are multiple use cases which I can really talk about it, but I thought maybe in the evidence workshop it is more to talk about the real things. So traceability, provenance of supply chain is really a big game changer, but it needs a big thrust from the regulatories. As Bosch, we are part of the Trusted IoT Alliance. We work with MOBI as an alliance. We work in huge Industry 4.0 consortiums where we believe that blockchain as a technology would really be leveraged for the next game. We also do work on pharma and agriculture. For example, we do have experience working with the example that Michael talked about with one of the Norwegian industry. We work for industries like dairy for provenance, where in Australia we're working on a very interesting use case where you need 11 days to prove that if there is a milk which has been contaminated, you need 11 days to go and prove to the regulator saying that it was for certain reasons. If they don't prove for a retailer, it is a liability onto it. So we are looking at how can we have this immediate consignment. The topic where Bosch plays a big role is on the things. So we have things which are blockchain enabled, which really can settle the contracts onto the ledger that has been there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I thought one of the issues you mentioned about accountability in the supply chain is extremely important. Maybe we come into that a bit more. Christina Lang, before I bring in from Accenture, can I just say there is most probably about to be a vote. My party are pushing the government to vote this evening, so make sure that they turn up. And a bell will ring. And if you look at the TV screens, you will see a little green bell will start waving. I'm afraid that means that I will need to leave and that Lord Waverley will need to take over the chairing of the remainder. But Christina, could I ask you now to address? So please don't say, I do need to leave if the bell goes.
Sure.
Joys of Parliament,
Thank you, and thank you. It's an honor to be here, and part of my role in Accenture is I run the identity, all things related to decentralized identity program, and I'm a program advisor to the World Economic Forum on all things related to digital identity, which is identity of people, of course, identity of things, identity of everything from sort of livestock to IoT devices to virtual entities. So the lens I'm going to take a little bit of is around sort of in manufacturing. Why does any of this matter, right? Lots of the colleagues have talked about whether it's food, whether it's manufacturing, the angles around whether it's sustainability, traceability, the trust in the product, and all of those things are great value cases, great use cases, and as Chris here said, it's already real. We have many pilots, some of which Mobi is, we're part of the Mobi consortium. One of the good examples that we have is 2.5 years ago, we did a pilot with Thales for airline parts. How do we know this airline component is real? And if you think about, airlines goes on hopefully for 20 plus years in their lifetime. So you don't want to recall. And the safety, the national security, all of that aspects of ensuring that the resilience of the realness of the parts, all the way from manufacturing to actually the right person implementing the parts and putting it into the airplane, checking whether that person has the right level of certification, that aspects of using blockchain is real. And that has already been proven from 2.5 years ago in ensuring that there's a level of accountability, as you quite rightly point out, in terms of that entire end-to-end process. And that's an airline one. Another one is, of course, vehicle. From the birth certificate of the vehicle, so to speak, the different components of the parts, whether it's a fan, whether it's all the IoT components of, is that really the right person driving the right car that's making the transaction, that's buying the pizza in the future, driverless or otherwise, is it the right lease car, so that is, if it's leased out through a car rental company, when does it require update, when doesn't it require update? Is it really with the sort of Dieselgate, with the EU sort of requirements, and of course, looking at what are we going to do as a country from a emissions? Is it real emissions? Is it fake emissions? And how much of the emissions is it really coming out? How do we do compliance? So those are some of the things that we're currently working with some of our clients on and thinking about, is this engine really going to release however much emissions? Is this real? Is this not real? How do we track it? And therefore, is this region really greener? Is this not greener? How do we reduce traffic? And looking at the raw data that comes in. So those are two of the manufacturing aspects that we're, two example projects that we're currently working on or previously. Another area, a little bit different, is fashion. The third biggest polluter. I talked a little bit about this in Davos this year. And one of the interesting aspects, fashion is one of the least recycled product out there. It's almost impossible as a woman. Where do you take this stuff to recycle? Different threads. It's like a granola bar, a lot like food in that sense. It's all different components. I mean, just look at the dress in terms of buttons, threads. How do we recycle, and how do we incentivize and track, from track and trace, which many of the colleagues have talked about, also to the aspects of ensuring that people actually recycle. How do we incentivize? How do we enable the manufacturing process to say, right, these are the recyclable components, these are the things that are not recycled, this is where you put these components, these are the bits that you can reuse, and it's still fairly early days in the fashion industry, but a project that we want called Project Thread is a lot of the fashion retailers and the manufacturers that come together to want to do something like this. But where the role of the governments could really make a difference is, how do we make this quicker for the private sector to work together? How do we foster actual action and enabling people to say, to take away some of the liability aspects of sort of not having to be involved in a game of chickens, and to produce things, to do things quickly and to enable to show that these examples, when it's big consortium, that it can be done without the fear of competition regulation, without the fear of retribution around, if we work together, are we now in some conflict, and if how can we work together? And I think that needs some guidance from the government that would be really, really useful for some of these players. And lastly, going back to a little bit of food, an initiative that we started around circular supply chain and how that would work in changing incentives, coupling digital identity, blockchain traceability, and payments. Some key concepts around blockchain, changing incentives of the consumer and retailers, base of the pyramid producers. So a bit like the agri-ledger concept in Haiti. If I scan a bag of coffee in Waitrose, how do I know it's really the entity that produced it? How do I know it's authentic? How do I know it's grown without destroying the rainforest, so on and so forth? And I can make a payments back as consumer to base of the pyramid producer by saying pay it forward, basically. So there are a number of different initiatives out there that are already real. And it's already, many of them are in production. From trade finance, linking different industry, from trade finance, banking, because that's the other side of sort of manufacturing, agriculture, and the supply chain itself, and of course the consumer. And I think the lack of thinking through in an ecosystem manner, much like what Julie mentioned, that ecosystem aspect is important. Of course, we do track and trace authenticity, the trust in the product, but it's also thinking beyond that bit of the supply chain, because otherwise, it doesn't help trade. It doesn't help us for manufacturers to differentiate that they have a great product, that we can do it faster, we can do it cheaper, and more in a more sustainable manner. And I think those are some of the things that to bring different sectors together, probably some things that the governments would be a great area to help the private and public sector to be able to bring some of that thinking together. And finally, incentives. An area that people don't often talk about is getting all of these players, whether it's regulators, whether it's consumers, whether it's banks, whether it's to the base of pyramid producers, getting the right incentives and limiting that liability and risk are some of the things that really, really need to be thought about. So,
thank you very much. In terms of the reducing liability, I thought it was very interesting. And how we get around the issue of reducing liability while keeping that kind of the element of trust. It's that kind of how low do you go in terms of reducing liability, because the liability element itself is intrinsic in the rules-based system. So maybe I'll give you a question then and to start us off. Can blockchain possibly drive the Internet of Things in manufacturing?
I could definitely take this question because I would say it's essential for Internet of Things to become more economic agents, because you can't just connecting all the things, keep them connecting and try to automate the things, but you need to have those autonomy that you need to delegate to those things, in the sense when you're not there, the electricity has to be switched off. In the sense, you need to make the, things more accountable for what they are doing. So you essentially need that fabric of trust. You need the fabric of value creation or settlements. I think blockchain is definitely needed, for you to move from automation to autonomy.
Kristen, do you want to say anything on that?
Yes, I think think about the gazillions of things that are coming, whether it's our health devices or how do you manage that? How do you trust all that? How do you, to your point, how do you execute all of that and delegate all of that? That aspects of a trust chain is critical to enable those transactions to have accountability. So as the gazillions of devices come up, those are some of the, how do you manage those devices, how do you account for manufacturing, the point of manufacturing all the way to execution, and then and the trade afterwards, what happens?
Listen, George, come on as well. No, George, the question?
Yes. Well, I'm glad, Christine, you brought that subject and also about traceability and autonomy, excuse me. During a previous APPG session, we had the pleasure to welcome Christina Blacklaws, who was president of the Law Society. And on this occasion, I asked her a very odd question. Can a machine be, in legal terms, a moral person? Can a machine have a personhood? And her answer was yes, which opened doors to another level, which is, can a machine, which I didn't follow at the time, actually, I didn't express myself well enough at that point, can a machine be a taxpayer? Can a machine be and can we trace the tax that the machine, autonomous and abandoned, be? And there we are on the one hand in blockchain technology, on the other hand in artificial intelligence, and we have an APPG AI which I also attend. So yes, traceability and the use of blockchain in manufacture is the future. And the idea of a car abandoned to its fate exists in Russia. If you go out of Moscow airport, the cars are abandoned. You have an app, Belko, I think the name. You just type something, and then you pay $10. You can jump into the car, you can take it wherever you want, and you just abandon it to its fate for the next client. So blockchain technology and AI is indeed a big future in manufacturing.
I think if you don't do it, you will live the privilege to be given to the platform monopolies. In the sense, people who are in the business of making the machines have to make the machine a taxpayer, have to make the machine accountable. Otherwise, what would essentially happen is this privilege, what we have today with blockchain as a technology, you would let it go to the platform monopolies, which has happened in the internet era. Yes. So, that is the reason why you see whether it is an autonomous car or whether it is an autonomous machine, they are looking blockchain as a taxpayer, in your words.
I think Neil Term used to call it a dodge. The machine can become the taxpayer, but not the person who's created the machine to create the income. But Jeffrey, before I come in, is there anyone in the body of the Kirk wants to ask a question in the public gallery?
I would like to answer the previous question about IoT and blockchain. So two issues there, pragmatically speaking. One is security, the other one is what happens with the data generated or operated on by IoT. The security, on our example, we're working with Infineon, which is a German semiconductor manufacturer, with secure hardware chips for unique identification of IoT devices, industry standard encryption, and so on and so forth. So you know that data coming from this device is actually proper data that you want to have. And then the data itself, again, is not stored in a black box that nobody understands, but in a readable format. Those two things are, well, in our mind,
Jeffrey, you want to start?
Yes. So first, thank you. Thank you for this. First, I wanted to reply to the idea of that Christian raised of machines having moral agency with skepticism. And the reason for this is not only because it's very difficult to imagine a machine doing anything other than that which we as humans instruct it to do, even if those instructions give rise to a variety of emerging properties that are difficult to explain, but also because there is a clear motivation that has been demonstrated reliably in the past of many different businesses, including the popular platform monopolists that Raghavendra has mentioned, in using technology to externalize responsibility, which is precisely the dodge that we're concerned about. And this is something that I think we need to be really careful about, because, well, if it's not completely self-explanatory, that someone might be able to say, well, it's just the computer. Computer says no, I can't explain why you didn't get your loan, but really I've been using all sorts of data about all of your activities, and this computer is just a means for me to implement all the biases that I want. This is basically, I think, a very dangerous path, and something that's been described as math washing in the past, and I really love that term. So the other thing, I think, the question that I really wanted to ask for like Christina and Raghavendra, well, really there are two parts of it. One is, if we're talking about IoT, how do we make sure that consumers and individual persons' privacy and autonomy are not undermined when we deploy IoT systems? For example, unique IDs of devices, if that's what we're talking about, mobile phone devices that have IMEIs can be used to track and trace individual persons, and now, as of last week, are being used by the US government very explicitly to do so. The second question is, how do we prevent monopoly, or how do we prevent platformization, which is the default scenario I would like to suggest to this group, that the platform monopoly is the default end state when we don't have regulation of these kinds of systems. So how do we make sure that we're not going to lead to just one firm being chosen to rule forever?
So, should I take the privacy one, perhaps, as a starting point? I think you're spot on in terms of ensuring this is segregation and layers of segregation, whether it's process, whether it's InfoSec or other processes, and how do you then link it up? It's not just clever architecture, clever technology, but ability to understand the unintended consequences of, and this is rampant in technology right now, especially in blockchain, the unintended consequences of putting people's data, whether it's people's data, trade data, all of that aspects of ensuring how do you segregate, we need to be able to think for the future. And this sounds really dumb. But at the end of the day, thinking through what used to be considered private 50 years ago, 10 years ago, it's not the case today. And what is considered very private today is going to be very, very different going forward. And whatever bad data goes in to the blockchain, it doesn't come back out. So the aspects of governance of the blockchain, who should see what, how should it be configured, the aspects of thinking through how do we architect solutions and govern those solutions in such a way that minimum amount of data should be used and should be put on chain, that needs to really, really be considered very carefully with appropriate access control and ability to change.
May I? I actually think I'd like to bring it to a even more basic level that we're not talking about. It's data ownership. Who is creating the data? How is the data being used? And how will that data could be used? So I agree with Ms. Lang's view that we need to have proper architecture and data governance. And that requires what I believe is really the private-public partnership. It is really good to have this kind of session where we can look to educate our politicians onto what are the possibility, both the good and the ugly, because I think that what we forget a lot of time is what data not kept safe has caused in terms of creating opportunities for genocide and for
all these are relevant, most certainly. Professor, are you ready to step in the stage, and then we'll come back in a moment to our friend on that.
My question is related to, so we're talking about manufacturing and agriculture, and they're two very physical sectors compared to lots of the other sectors we talk about. And if we were talking about artificial intelligence, we would see a big interaction between hardware and software, where really we talk about robots, wearable technology, huge hundreds of million parts of infrastructure investments. But now when we talk about blockchain, from an infrastructure perspective, is it mainly information systems and data governance, or in agriculture, do the harvesters need to have a barcode and the machines in the factories, or what is required for the local infrastructure investment, and what's also required for the national infrastructure investment? Here I'm talking about physical investment, or is it all about just ICT, 5G, broadband, data governance?
It depends on what is your goal. Are you looking to have intra-government, intra your country, which means you're looking to make sure that you have food safety and food security, which means enough and also it's not going to kill, versus you're looking to export. So if you're looking to export, then you need to have things such as barcode, and those are the demands of really the society that comes in next. However, what we have in this system are people, and they're not predictable. So being able to create environments, and also we make assumptions. What I don't know if it's been clear, 80% of the world is done by smallholder farmer, and they feed 70% of the world, which means we really need to look at how we're going to get there and how we're going to make sure, because we don't realize it's coming to our shores, and that's also going to it's an item of national security in some places. And so we need to look at how we mitigate that. So yes, you will need technology, but the level of technology will depend also on the possibility. So it's not smartphone everywhere, but it's information that needs to be gathered.
Thank you, Genevieve. So,
I wanted to comment on the issue of privacy. I think that we are at the right place to discuss this. In my mind, very firmly held belief is that technology can absolutely not solve the issue of privacy. That is something that has to be done by regulation, by legislation. We all generate gazillions of data points all the time, and these data points will be abused to the maximum extent permissible by law. So it is the job of legislators to ensure that they can't be overly abused, wherever that point of balance is.
it's quite clear to me that education and understanding of parliamentarians to have government also understand where and what needs and can be done to help a whole manner of range of issues. Lady, I've got in a little note that maybe the audience, would anyone in the audience like to join in? Do they have an applicable question? Or should we go? We'll come back to you in a moment. That's to the gentleman in the back.
Thank you very much.
Who could you say who you are and where you're from?
My name is Tommy Jarrett. I work for Medical Reply. I'm just going to point that we're also talking about how technology is designed to help society get to the stage. Now, I'd like to also, I'd like to invite everyone to also think of that we could also consider that technology should be considered at the other way of the spectrum, and reverse the spectrum to just identify first what the problem are and just understand which technology could be the best fit to address that problem. And if we look at things this way, maybe blockchain could be not just the answer to everything, but come into a technological toolbox that just fits wherever it fits.
Thank you very much. Julie, would you care to join us?
Thank you. I just wanted to maybe pick up on Peter. There's a question around scale of investment. And personally, based on what I've observed and what seen in our pilots, was that in the grand scheme of things, I don't think very large amounts of money and infrastructure is the challenge here. Where we are with this, it's much more around the points we've been discussing, around trust, around governance, around standards, is teasing out all of those things, and particularly working out what the role of the regulators is. And I think just going back to a point somebody made earlier around the idea of international, that means therefore multiple regulators. And if I'm looking at any sort of real business application, I could say, even just from a UK point of view, you could get at least half dozen regulators in that room with a view on that thing that might need to be regulated. So for me, I think that's the challenge of understanding all that, understanding the various roles and unpacking all of that, not investment on its own money.
I mean, certainly we've got to make everything in a way which everyone understands. And once they understand, then people can engage and work out for themselves and beyond where and what and how this application can be best used. Not least, I'm looking forward to continuing discussion with Genevieve on a range of issues. So.
I wanted to reply quickly to the gentleman from SAP that although in many cases technology alone cannot solve some of these issues related to, say, privacy or monopoly or some of these other problems, policy can create infrastructure, can legislate the creation and use of technical infrastructures that are private by design or resist monopoly by design. And I think that that's precisely where we need leadership from government. And it is a kind of leadership that does involve implications for the technical systems that get used.
But do you think government understands?
I hope so.
And this is what the Secretariat, I think, from all this meeting, and I apologize for being late, is pulling all these issues together so that we can encourage the participants as to when, what, and how they can use this applicability is absolutely essential. And the sooner we do it, the better. Genevieve.
I'm just going to quickly say...
Julie, sorry, Genevieve. Yeah, do you want to come in again?
Yes, could I answer your question?
Sorry, Genevieve, come back.
Just as part of government, does government understand? And I would say, broad brush, I would say no. So that's where we need...
Maybe a few would agree with you, but that's what this...
but I can
we
say
need
that.
innovation, we need to do more with less.
Yeah.
And this is an opportunity to do so, and also help save taxpayers' money, if used in the right way as well, I think.
What I was going to say is that we overcomplicate things. When I have a farmer in Haiti, in rural Haiti, who understands what the technology will do for him or her, that's the key. What are the benefits that I'm going to see? And that better income, safety. So we need to break down things. We make them overcomplicated by really talking about the technology and the stuff in the air that's happening.
Good point.
When at the end of the day, is how is it going to make my life better?
Right.
And if you start from that conversation, then people are accepting that it is going to be a plus, not a negative, and not something to be scared of.
I'm looking forward, Genevieve. I'm going to ask you, as I say, I wrote an article last night about the Africa Free Trade Agreement, and I could actually put into this business magazine, in fact I wrote it for Davos at the World Economic Forum, an earlier piece, and would like a contribution for that, which we can add in this week, which will then get published at the end of the month. We can speak about that again, sir.
Yeah, so just a comment on that, and I agree, it should be for the smaller companies, it should be made simple, and I think it comes to the point that actually gentleman raised over there, it's a toolbox of technical solutions. Blockchain on its own won't do anything. So IoTs apart, mobiles apart, it's all part of the same solution. And so we're working, as I said, in the construction sector, we're looking at maybe putting QR codes or barcodes on pieces of steel as one way of identifying it, but equally giving an SME a mobile device so they can actually just enter the fact that they've arrived at a particular site and validated delivery. So I think but all of those can interact with blockchain, but it's hidden. And I think in many cases the blockchain should be a hidden network, and all you're seeing is really a mobile device or a web browser or whatever.
So with all you here in the room, what finally, because I think we need to be thinking about drawing this meeting to a close, what would be your advice as how to best proceed in addressing all the issues that have been touched at today, so the people who do need to understand can get their head around this? What would be, say, 4 ideas, what to do in regards to the subject we've been discussing today? Genevieve.
Make it as though you're explaining it to grandma.
Sorry?
Make it as though you're explaining it to grandma.
That's number 1. Thank you. Anyone else? Another idea? 2. We've got 2 here.
If you would take a lead in the foreign trade settlements, and try to at least set up, framework where you could really define what are those, lighthouse projects which can really, enable you to take the leap, would be a better one, whether it is for food or manufacturing.
Ladies first, Christine. And then,
along the same line is fostering projects that between public-private as private, but enabling to actually companies to work together and to prove, to not just prove, but to show value, so that they understand the incentives, and then therefore how does one regulate and how does one legislate?
So we need a public-private forum as well to encourage government to come in. So
government makes the rules and industry builds. So look at co-regulation, look at MiFID in particular, look at, from the financial industry, look at examples in which government has actually very explicitly worked with industry groups to define the parameters in which they must operate at a technical level without actually specifying the details of the technology.
So our chairman is back, Mr. Dockley-Hughes, sir.
Yeah, forgive me
back to you.
I know that Julie wants to come in briefly if you want to say something very briefly, because we will get thrown out of this room any moment now by the parliamentary staff.
I was just building on the suggestions made there, was not only get government in the room, but maybe you, Chair, will understand that government isn't a single being, it's a multi-headed being, so if you can exhort us variously to come in together, I think that would be very beneficial.
Thank you very much. Can I ask us all to thank our speakers in the traditional way? And also thank the team for organising today with a little bit of manoeuvring across the parliamentary estate. If you were escorted to this part of Parliament, the easiest way to leave is to go out to the left, go down the staircase or the lifts to the main lobby. and then you exit out through Westminster Hall. That's the easiest way. But again, thank you very much for a very interesting, insightful and informative session, and hopefully we'll see you at the next one. Thank you again. Thank you.